after it was approved by the United States Congress later that year. Essentially, clarifies the health and safety of children served by child welfare services as being their paramount concern, aims to move children in foster care more quickly into permanent homes. Among the new provisions, shortens the time frame of a child's first permanency hearing, offers state financial incentives for increasing the number of adoptions, sets new requirements for states to petition for termination of parental rights, and reauthorizes the Family Preservation and Support Program. Okay, so that's right there. That's a total of $6,000. This article was written 11 years ago. Okay, so for these incentive payments, that would be estimated at approximately $20 million being authorized for each of these years from 1999 to 2003 when this information was collected. Here's what's really disgusting. The modification of this law was intended to prevent children from languishing in foster care. In addition to bonuses that the ASFA also removed protections for parental rights and made getting families back together a priority. Under the new law, though, states have much more leeway in deciding whether their social workers have made a reasonable effort to reunite the family. Okay, so the HHS, Lynn Hennison, says that the bonuses were meant to apply to adoption-only eligible children already in the system. The money, she says, prods states into cutting through red tape and moving kids into permanent homes. But how those kids wind up in the system in the first place is left to the individual states. It is, in fact, the money motive that has critics outraged. The people getting the money for the children should not be the same people deciding to take the children, said Brad Discus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute in Sacramento, California. It's an organization that provides legal support to cases involving parental rights, religious rights, and civil liberties. Nev Moore, founder of the Massachusetts-based Justice for Family, said states need a steady supply of adoptable eligible children to keep the federal dollars flowing. In some states, social workers are even paid individual cash bonuses for each child that they take into custody. So each child has a dollar value. This is a system intended to protect children under fire, but this has become something quite other. Here's a not-so-recent statistic, but still alarming. In 1999, according to the National Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting System, 49,000 children were placed in foster care based on unsubstantiated reports of abuse and neglect. Of the 900,000 substantiated case of child abuse filed each year, almost 40% fall under a vague other category, separate from physical or sexual abuse or serious neglect. The remaining 60% were for mostly neglect. It's those unsubstantiated cases that have families questioning it. Things that people are losing their children for. A couple of quick examples: homeschooling, different religious practices, persistent diaper rash, scratches from pets, milk intolerance, cystic fibrosis, a heating system issue, messy room, or housekeeping concern. These are all documented as not just abuse, but also neglect as being reasons for taking children into custody. The social workers often have different philosophies than the parents that they're involved with and have different views on what their best interests are, and that can be a huge barrier because these kids are then put into homes with totally different values, social and ethical and sexual lifestyles than their parents. Many of the families' testimonies that I have read, their children were subjected to absolutely despicable circumstances and weren't allowed to have access to their friends, families, or normal activities that they engage in. And these are all policies that each state writes as to how engaged they're supposed to be with their familial circle. But when alienation is the key factor and the very first prominent thing that families are seeing in these Child Protect Services cases is a huge issue. When the children are alienated, they are disengaged and they start becoming damaged at that point. That will be in a future podcast. We're going to be discussing the traumatic impact that being a child in CPS or DHS custody has on the child. We will also have a podcast discussing the impact it has on the parents. I'd like to thank you for listening to Awareness Train and Mommy on a Mission. Please like and subscribe. Look for Twitter, Mommy on a Mission 5. Facebook, you'll find Awareness Train with a rally picture in the background with a black and white photo. Reform CPS. Shout louder. Love is power. Reform HR-867. Parents for Reunification. Please consider informing yourself by looking at the Congressional law, https://www.congress.gov.bill/105th-House-Bills/867. It's really difficult for wounded families to stand up and scream and holler and shout when every day of their lives they're just trying to hang on without their babies. Their voices need to be heard by people who are strong and able-minded and care and want to be a part of the positive change that desperately needs to happen in the United States of America. You want to free up the foster system, start talking to the families that you're harvesting the children from. This is Awareness Train and Mommy on a Mission. Thanks for listening. Stay informed. Until next time.
Power is always dangerous. It attracts the worst and corrupts the best. I never asked for power. Power is only given to those who are prepared to lower themselves to pick it up.
Hello. Welcome back to another edition of Awareness Train and Mommy on a Mission's podcast as we address Congressional Law HR-867, Episode 1, Segment 3. Just a quick review, Congressional Law HR-867 is a law that gives federal kickbacks to child protection services during foster care and after parental rights terminations. PRT. What could go wrong, right? Well, that's what we'll be discussing in this series. Definitely encourage you to listen in or reach out to submit your story or positive input. Anonymity is respected. Folks with disabilities are accommodated upon request or notification. Articles read and documents mentioned whenever possible will be given full, accurate location of where that document was located. If you're a student, you're doing research or writing a paper, and you need citations for the sources that I've listed, please check the description. There may sometimes be links in the description to the sources that I'm using. If not, they will be read out loud for our sight-impaired followers. So anyway, what we're talking about is we're talking about the several $1,000s that states get in federal kickbacks when a child's rights or parents' rights are terminated from one another and the child is expunged from the foster care system. Back in 2011, that amount was around $4,000. Then $2,000 if the child had any disabilities. 10 years later, I can only imagine what that is, and I'm having a really hard time finding any mainstream media coverage on what the statistics look like, but I can only imagine it's way worse than that. So I'm now looking at an article. It's titled "When CPS Kidnaps Children for Money." It is authored by Selwyn Duke, December 6th, 2014. This article is shareable on 7 different media platforms. So this article is from the New American, and what they're discussing here is they're discussing that the general perception of CPS is that they're generally taking children that have been abused and neglected, and the average person is assuming that to be able to have such power over such a private, natural-born right that there must be some pretty, clear, evident circumstances to validate something like that. And so what this article is basically doing is saying who's at fault, the parents or the state or both. And of course it varies, on a case-by-case basis, but what this article is alleging is that every time CPS seizes a child, it gets money from the federal government. Lots of money. I am now reading from that article. Critics have warned that this has a corruptive effect. And this online news media company is saying, as the New York Times bestseller author Dr. Joseph Mercola wrote in 2011, quote, "Did you know that the money funneled to the states and Child Protective Services actually encourages them to accuse you of child abuse and even murder, and to take your children, even if they have absolutely no proof that you've harmed your child?" Horrendous as it sounds, it's true. Child abuse has become a business, an industry of sorts, that actually pays states to legally abduct your children and put them up for adoption. Mercola then quotes a source informing about a California politician who pledged to expose this practice. He quotes, "Most people are not aware of how much profit many of these services provide the county." John Van Dorn, D-O-R-R-N, like Nancy, told a San Diego newspaper, quote, "These profits are hard to ignore and even more difficult to pass up," unquote. "Counties can bring in thousands of dollars in excess revenue for each child in foster care," Van Dorn said, "which means that they have more incentive to remove children from their families than to keep them, in fact. As such, our county government is a major factor in dismantling of families and the destruction of children's lives," he said. All right, so I'm getting a little bit lost in where the person that wrote this article is putting the quotes in. The way they set that up is a little different than me, so if it sounds like I'm getting a little lost, that's the reason. Sorry. I'm just recording live here. And then they give a few stories in this article that are pretty disgusting from different people saying that they're taking their kids for profit. And I don't think these families are saying this just lightly. I mean, as was discussed in the other episode, not the other episode, but the other segment, there was another person that was calling out the major statistics pointing to very mild concerns that really are at the discretion of the social workers who are doing the substantiation. That worker comes out and they are the ones that's your first that's your first POC, your point of contact. That social worker is going to evaluate a whole crap ton of stuff, and they're going to put together their data and process the case however they decide. Well, when you're reading about all these parents that are describing how all these idiosyncrasies and petty things were being brought up as reasons why these different workers were criticizing their ability to be fit parents, and like I read the list in the other segment, like things like a housekeeping issue, which in some cases housekeeping issue could be something happened in the family that caused either a loss of wages or a loss of available time at home to maintain certain areas of the home. A person may have been injured, and it could be any kind of circumstance that could cause a person's home to be less than desirable and not be the norm. But, basically parents are coming and saying that there's some prejudice going on and that they're not being truthfully evaluated for their substantiations, and that in fact they're saying that some of the things that are being listed as issues for moving these children that these parents are completely objecting to. So when you then take a look at articles that are discussing how much money changes hands when these kids are in the foster system, and then when they're gotten rid of the foster system, how much money changes hands. I mean, there's so much going on. I was reading from the actual Congressional law, HR-867, on I think it was my first or second cast, and